Well, good morning to you on another beautiful day. It's Tuesday and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Lovely to see you. So glad you could join us. Well, my friends, we are working our way through the letter of Paul to the Romans. And you know, I really am valuing the way we are doing the Bible this way, starting at the beginning of the book and going to the end of the book, because that way we get the whole lot. We get the good, the bad and the ugly. We get the nice bits and we get the tough bits as well. So in Romans, we get the lovely stuff in Romans 8 and we get the tough stuff in Romans 9. And I do think actually it's very important for all of us to have our faith challenged, to have our faith and our minds stretched, to allow people like Paul to stretch our minds and to challenge our faith, because that way we keep moving on with God. We're never the finished article. God is still working on us. There's a poster that used to say, "Be patient, God hasn't finished with me yet." So, as I say, we're working our way through Romans, and I have to say, as someone that's trying to explain to you what Paul means, Paul doesn't always make life easy. And I shall take it up with him in heaven one day. But anyway, with that in mind, we're in Romans chapter 9, starting to read at verse 19. Just listen out and I'll explain to you what I think it means afterwards. Here goes. Paul says, "You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But indeed, who are you, a human being, to argue with God? Will what is moulded say to the one who moulds it, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one object for special use, another for ordinary use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and make known his power, has endured with much patience the objects of wrath that are made for destruction? And what if he has done so in order to make known the riches of his glory for the objects of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory, including us whom he has called, not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles? As indeed he says in Hosea, 'Those who are not my people, I will call my people. To her who was not beloved, I will call beloved.' And in the very place where it was said to them, 'You are not my people,' there they shall be called children of the living God." And Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, "Though the number of the children of Israel were like the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will be saved. For the Lord will execute his sentence on earth quickly and decisively." And as Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left survivors to us, we would have fared like Sodom and been made like Gomorrah. What then are we to say? Gentiles who did not strive for righteousness have attained it, that is, righteousness through faith. But Israel, who did strive for the righteousness based on the law, did not succeed in fulfilling the law. Why not? Because they did not strive for it on the basis of faith, but as if it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone. As it is written, "See, I am laying in Zion a stone that would make people stumble, a rock that will make them fall, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Right, as I say, Paul's not making my life easy, but I'll give it my best shot. Paul is talking in chapter 9 about the Jews in particular. Bear in mind, Paul had been a Jew. And he was lamenting the fact yesterday, in the first chapter 9, that some of them hadn't become, quite a lot of them in fact, but almost all of them hadn't become Christians. And he was saying how sad he was about that. And now he's going on to talk about how do we be children of God? And he's already explained that you don't become a child of God by external symbols like circumcision. They're just signs, okay? You also don't become a child of God by just having the right parents. It's not enough just to be able to trace your ancestry back to Abraham. You have to be children of the promise, not just of the right bloodstock. You also cannot get there by our own works and our own attainment, because we just can't do it, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We also cannot get there by doing it on basis of the works of the law. We can't achieve it. It can only be achieved through faith in what God has done for us. Basically, we need to be children of the promise. Okay, we need to rely on what God has done. But the point remains, unless we are called by God, so to speak, we cannot be children of God. And then Paul says, well, you might say, okay, how can it be then? How can any blame be attached to somebody who hasn't responded if it all depends on what God has done? Because it does kind of appear as if God's decided it's going to happen, if God's not decided it's not going to happen, therefore it's not very fair on some, it seems to be very nice on some people and not very fair on the others. You know, and so he talks about that. But then Paul gives an answer. He says, and I have to say, it's an answer which is barely satisfactory, really. He says, who do you think you are questioning God? Does a piece of clay question the potter about whether they're being made into a posh bit of crock or a practical bit of crock? No, of course they don't, because the potter decides. And in the same way, Paul says, who do we think we are speculating about what God is doing? Who do we think we are? He's talking here about the sovereignty of God. I mean, in a sense, he's got a point here, because at the end of the day, God is God, and God does do what God wants to do. Of course, that's right. But I think Paul himself realizes that's not really a satisfactory answer, because having said it, we shouldn't speculate what God is doing because who we are, he then goes on to do exactly that. He goes on to speculate about what God might be doing, and he gives some suggestions here. Firstly, he says this, he basically says, could it be that God withholds his mercy for a while in order to show his power and his mercy? Could it be that he doesn't just give us his love, so to speak, straight away, but he holds it back to demonstrate his mercy and his love to us? Let me show you what I mean. He talks at the beginning about people who are objects of wrath and doomed for destruction. And I think you've got to remember that Paul was somebody who had been about as far away from the Christian faith as you can get. He hated Christians to the point he persecuted the church, and yet God had chosen even him. And so what he's saying is, could it be that to demonstrate God's incredible love, that he picks on the sort of the biggest scumbags and picks on them? So could it be that he deliberately picks objects of destruction, objects of wrath, because he calls it, in order to save them, to demonstrate God's incredible, superabundant mercy? So could it be that he deliberately picks objects of destruction in order that he might demonstrate his mercy? That's one possibility. Another possibility, in the first Isaiah quote, he's talking about those who've been saved. The implication being that actually, by holding mercy back for a while and then showing it, that end state is better than the first. So by being saved demonstrates that actually after God has acted, you ended up being in a better state than you would have been before had it not happened, if that makes sense. So by talking about people being saved, he's talking about is actually turning out to be better. So God's mercy is so great. By holding it back, by having them being saved, it demonstrates an even better state than it might have been. Another way God shows his mercy. And another one he talks about, another possibility of showing his mercy is this. He talks about people like had God not saved enough people, we'd have ended like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think what he's basically saying here is, he demonstrates the fact that actually we need God. And by holding back his mercy, he's demonstrating the fact that actually we need the mercy of God. There's a lovely old Christian song that used to say, people need the Lord. We think we don't. As a human race, we like to think that we are terribly, terribly clever. We like to think that we're terribly self-sufficient. We look after ourselves and we're in control of our own destiny. But what he's showing here is actually that we can't. That actually, if we live life God's way, we're living life according to the Maker's instructions. And if we do it our own way, there's a fine mess we get ourselves into, so to speak. So what Paul is speculating here is, could it be that holding back his mercy for a while, what God is doing is he's showing his mercy and his love. Firstly, in picking the biggest scumbags of the earth and showing mercy on them, he's demonstrating the incredible power of his love. What a great, merciful God he is. Could it be that by holding it back now and then saving the people, the end state being better than the first, it's wonderful to be saved in Jesus. He's demonstrating again his power and his mercy to us. And thirdly, by holding it back for the time being, he's demonstrating the fact that without God, we're in trouble. But actually, in reality, we need God. That we need God. And living life God's way, in him, we're living life to the full. Jesus said, I come to give you life, and life in its fullness. And that's what we have with God. And without God, we don't. So, Paul answers a difficult question, okay? Why does God do what? And the first thing he says, like I said, is who are we to question God? He's pointing here he's making the point actually that God is sovereign, that this is God's will, and ultimately God can do what God wants. But he does give some suggestions as to why God might. Firstly, as I say, by picking the biggest sinners like him and making them into Christians, he demonstrates his incredible love. Secondly, that by being saved, we're ended up in a better state than we've been before. And thirdly, how the fact that this is God's world and we need him, that without him we're in trouble. It's Sodom and Gomorrah, that's where we're heading. But with God, there's hope, there's joy, this peace and this life. I hope that makes some